I'd like to welcome Dave Orton and everyone who is viewing to this podcast. This podcast is about psychology, mental health, and coaching matters. And I would like to invite my guests into a heart-to-heart conversation about themes in our lives that might affect us all, indirectly or directly, and that are not easy to talk about at times, such as depression. And today we'll be talking about depression, and we'll be touching on feeling suicidal, maybe pornography, which can often be part of being depressed. So that's the theme today. And I think the idea is to introduce these conversations because we often don't easily share these things because they're shame laden, there are taboos around them and judgment. And my passion is to kind of begin to have conversations about these things in our lives. So today I'd like to invite Dave Orton in a conversation. And I'd like to introduce you, Dave, maybe sharing a little bit how I met you and what you so generously shared with me. So I've met you in a situation when I felt quite vulnerable. I was attending last year the Ultimate Experience in London, and I just come out of a bit of a dark hermit-like kind of couple of years because my parents had died and I was going through a grieving process and it was lockdown. So I kind of lived a bit of a couple of years like a hermit. I'd only had contact with family and family friends. And then I decided, a friend said, why don't you come along to this amazing event? So I did. But I was feeling quite shaky and vulnerable. And I remember I entered, I think it was in the Lancaster Hotel in London. I landed the registration hall, feeling shaky, insecure, and a bit tearful even. And there, Dave opened up his arms and he said, oh, hello, Kirsten. So lovely to see you. And I'd briefly posted a video in a Facebook group we are both part of, and that's how you'd kind of had a perception of who I was. And I kind of felt that warm-heartedness, that warm-hearted, welcoming way of being. I think that's what you are about. And I think that's a beautiful ingredient in your personality. Another thing I love about you, Dave, is your open-mindedness and open-heartedness and your way of being able to articulate things. And that's why I was keen to have this conversation with you today. I think not everyone is able and willing and confident enough to talk about their experience of depression and in the way you do. So I admire that, and I think it takes courage and confidence. Another thing, the last thing I feel is quite amazing about you and exceptional is that you are a creator of possibility for other people. And I've experienced that as well. I think once you and I had a a kind of a Zoom call, and I said to you, Dave, I admire your Facebook Lives. You also seem to find it so easy. And then you said, Kirsten, you can do this too. And here we go. And you kind of almost threw me in this experience and said, if you want, you can jump now. And I did. And that really opened up a possibility for me. It maybe even have been a big stepping stone to being here, live in a Zoom call to be visible. So I think that's warm-hearted, open-hearted, articulate, and a creator of many possibilities for other people in our lives. So that's my introduction, but maybe I leave a little bit of space for you to introduce yourself because you're based in America. I'm based in the UK.
Yes.
Yes,
hmm
and you're a coach and you've just gone into full-time coaching, haven't you? So maybe tell us
For
a little bit
sure.
about you.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and acknowledgement, Kirsten. I acknowledge you for being willing to when we were talking about lives and we just jumped in for jumping in. There are a lot of people that would say, no, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And you're like, I'll play along. Let's do that. So thank you for doing that and being that. For me, who you are being is this courageous, independent, interdependent, divinely inspired professional of mental health, and one who is a stand for that mental health care works for people instead of it just being a situation where people are profit centers for the mental health industry. That's a very American perspective.
Right.
And I have that
Yes,
perspective. So
because
thank
you're
you for
American. Yes.
that's right. Thank you for your stand for that. I really appreciate you. Uh, Anything else to add? Yeah, I've been married to my beautiful wife, Penny, for 25 years. We have 4 children. Our oldest is 24 and our youngest is 16 years old. And yeah, I'm loving life right now. This last year has been the most remarkable year of my life so far.
Wow.
And this year is looking even more remarkable so far, but it's just amazing. So thank you
Yes.
for being a part of that.
It's an absolute pleasure. Yes. Shall we kind of dive into our conversation about
Let's do it.
depression?
Yeah,
And it's lovely to hear, that you are a man who has experienced depression, as I think many of us have, and now you're in a good place in your life, and I think that's a good vantage point to reflect on your experience, maybe here together.
yeah,
And maybe we can just share, maybe you could just share a little bit with us about your experience of depression and what sort of triggered you into this kind of dark place.
certainly. It was a variety of factors, the largest of which was that I lost a job that I had had for 15 years, that I had conflated my identity with that title, that job, the actions I was taking. I was a global program manager and a site manager for a technology company. I'd been able to travel the world. I come from a very small rural town in Idaho. And so for me to be able to travel the world and see and try different foods was just a dream come true. And I felt like I was this globe trotting, have people working for me in 25 different countries, very important, well compensated person. And when that went away, and I couldn't quickly replace that with something of at least where I was
Mm,
earning about the same, I lost who I was. And we burned through all of our money, we burned through all of our savings, all of our retirement, even. And that was really when I occurred to myself, I think, is kind of broken. And that's when depression really hit.
right. So you
Stayed with
lost
me.
a sense,
Yeah.
sorry,
Oh,
you
go
lost a
ahead.
sense of your identity or who you were was very tied up in this job, being a successful uh, bread earner and professional. Yes, I can relate to that. Yes. So in that, then losing that job threw you in a bit of a crisis, and no money. And tell me a bit more about that experience.
It was it was an experience where I would wake up and feel terrified.
Mm,
I would wake up and feel just deep anxiety and concern and worry. And at the same time, after a few months of that, I could not get myself to move. And some of my friends who were mental health professionals began to tell me that I was, likely depressed and that I probably needed to go talk with someone.
yes.
Uh, and I did. I went and talked with my counselors, and it didn't make a big difference for me,
Mm,
unfortunately.
mm, 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 mm,
There wasn't anything they could say that would really get me through that. I didn't have a job. I wasn't providing
mm,
for my family. I wasn't
mm,
self-sufficient. I was
mm,
dependent
mm,
upon the government
mm,
and church and family for help
mm,
and to be
mm,
able to survive.
mm,
And that was, I think that was the other part, like the the unexpressed expectation that I had of myself was that I was valuable when I was providing. And when I wasn't
mm,
providing, there was something fundamentally wrong with me.
mm. Yes, that's a good way of describing it. Sometimes when we, from a psychological point of view, we think also of depression when life throws at throws us in experiences unexpected, and where it's almost the demands and expectations externally don't match up with the skills and coping kind of mechanisms that we haven't developed that yet. There's not a match. And often, in my experience with working with hundreds of people with depression and developing myself, out of difficult places, is there's often a kind of almost like a hidden agenda for growth and development here in a way in every depression and every mental health struggle, in my experience.
I love what you said, and that's exactly what I discovered after I was out of depression. I became
Yes,
extremely grateful, and I am today
yes,
so grateful
yes.
for that experience because I have as a coach, they say that you can only go as deep with your clients as you've gone yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
this helped me go deep,
Yes, it helped you
deeper
to
than I
walk.
ever really wanted to go. Yeah,
Yes, not wanted, but life has a habit of throwing us into unwanted places.
exactly.
I know these places quite well as well. And then when we are thrown into these places, we have to walk the territory. We have to kind of get to know the territory, and which is often the territory often has to do with what we do with our feelings and how our thoughts play into our feelings. The stories we tell us about ourselves. And yes, I just wondered, when we had a brief conversation before our podcast, you so poignantly shared a few coping mechanisms with me that didn't work, because I think that's what we do as well. We almost, human nature almost it almost seduces us in a way, trying to things to kind of deal with the depression that don't particularly work very well. And you shared with me a few of these, which is, some of it is pretending that there is no problem, and some others as well. You mentioned pornography and sex, which is often things that make you feel better, and I think,
Yeah.
again, that's specific not just to you, but to kind of human nature, trying to work something out, coping ways, but they don't work in the long term. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your experience in that
Sure.
way. Yes.
Yeah. So I, like you said previously, the coping mechanisms that I had used before didn't bring me out of the funk, didn't bring me out of
Mm,
this cloud of unknown sadness that I couldn't escape from for a year and a half.
yes.
So I tried to provide service to others. I tried to serve my way out of depression.
Mm,
I tried to pray my way out of depression
mm,
and
mm,
worship my way
mm,
out of depression. I tried to eat my way out of depression.
mm, mm, mm,
I tried to exercise my way out of depression.
mm, mm, mm,
I tried to, love make my way out of depression with my wife. I tried to sleep my way out of depression.
mm, mm,
I tried to distract my way out of depression, and that was watching movies, entertainment, and pornography, uh,
mm,
which gave me, all these things were interesting because I would have a short dopamine hit, like
mm,
the
mm, mm.
and certain ones became much more prevalent because the dopamine hit was easy and quick. So
Right.
pornography, for example, was just became something that was a coping mechanism that did damage. It occurs to me, like, because I would act out on this, um, do what I was doing, have the dopamine hit, and then feel even deeper shame for not having,
Yes, yes,
meeting my
yes.
expectations as a believing man. Yeah,
Yes, vicious circle, of the sort of almost a dopamine circle, in a way,
yeah,
trying to engage in things that make us feel better. And then often with addictions, there is the shame part of the vicious circle, which is, and guilt and feeling uncomfortable. Yeah, and it's often hidden because it's not easily shared. And
yeah,
no, I love the way you introduce that, and talk so thoughtfully about this, and thinking, yeah, that was part of my exploration. You're out of this depression. Yes.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, it's lovely what you said. The other thing I noticed was that at a certain level, I became addicted to guilt and shame because those were the
Mm,
feelings that were around. So if I did
mm,
something that was, that occurred to me as bad and wrong, then
mm.
I would I'd get a dopamine hit, and then I'd feel guilty about it. And the feeling guilty reminded me that I was a good person, because if I was a bad person, I wouldn't feel bad about doing bad things.
Yes, 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 yes. I think guilt can be is an interesting emotion. Psychologically, again, I think there are two sides to it. I think guilt, we can have guilt and to flagellate ourselves and make us feel bad, and but equally, guilt has to do with taking responsibility for our experiences, or if we hurt ourselves and maybe others in some ways. So yes. Yes, Dave, there's another question I wanted to ask you, as you've so thoughtfully talked about these different ways of coping, trying to cope, to find your way out of depression. Having spoken to so many people with depression, I'm also aware that often suicidal ideation suicidal ideas can sometimes almost become a way out. And I remember you mentioning that as well in our brief conversation. Would you mind sharing a bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. When it became clear that we were going to lose our house and we were going to be going bankrupt, basically. Uh, we love this house. It was when we designed it and we love it.
Yes.
When it became obvious that there was no way out, thoughts of basically thoughts of committing suicide in order to fulfill the requirements of the man, which was to provide for the family.
Mm.
I have a large life insurance policy on myself so that if I am to die, that Penny will immediately become a millionaire, you know? So the wonderful thing about this, not that it's ever wonderful, but the beautiful thing in my situation was that I had done enough work that I took this to Penny and talked about it with her, talked to my wife about this. And when I asked her if she wanted to become an instant millionaire, she said, "No, I just want you. If we lose the
Mm.
house, we've got family that we can live with. We both
Mm.
come from large families."
Mm-hmm.
And that was very reassuring. I never
Yes.
had any plans or anything like that, but at that moment, there was an attraction to the idea of ending my life to
Mm.
get out of
Mm.
the pain, as well as to fulfill the expectations of the man to provide.
Yes.
And that would have, yeah, it would have just, she would have had money and been sad, and our children would have had money for a while and then been very sad. So it
They would have
was
been bereft, to have lost their
exactly,
father and
yeah,
husband. And
exactly,
yes, I think you're describing that so well, how suicide can almost become almost a fantasized way out in a way.
yeah.
But yes. And can I just ask you how you did, after you've tried all these kind of circles, going around with different ways, so suicidal ideation, the dopamine hits that pornography gave you, the so being of help to others, all these different ways. You've tried
Mhm.
so many things, I can see. And what was it that actually helped you out of the vicious cycle of all of these attempts to break the
Yeah.
cycle of depression?
There were several things. Firstly, we got a
Mm-hmm.
massive amount of financial help from a family member.
Mm-hmm.
The generosity of my family is unbelievably high,
Mm-hmm.
and I so appreciate that. Secondarily, I went and was able to hire Steve Hardison as my coach,
Mm-hmm.
and I really just wanted him to wave a magic wand and send me back to the moderately happy, successful person that I had been before.
Mm-hmm.
And he said something to the tune of, "You can count on that. We will not be doing that." Instead, what he taught me was this process of compassionate self forgiveness for the
Mm-hmm.
judgments I'd had
Mm-hmm.
about myself.
Mm-hmm.
We created in possibility the being that I am now and that I
Mm.
continue to become.
Right.
So, where I had lost the previous projection of myself, who I
Mm-hmm.
thought I was, in
Mm-hmm.
this process, we broke down, forgave myself for the judgments, and created this new being
Mm-hmm.
as an act of creation and possibility from
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So depression really helped me get to nothing.
Yes, 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 to get to
Here's
nothing.
the bottom layer. Yeah. Um,
Right. Are you saying almost to dismantle your old self in a way, or to
Very much.
to kind of almost collapse the ideas you had about your identity before then? It collapsed, and then from that you grew a more authentic sense of being and self. Is that the kind of process you're
That's
talking about?
exactly what I
Okay.
mean. Yeah.
Yes.
And there was violence. It was not a conceptual thing. It was the experience of great discomfort as this dismantling occurred.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. It can be such a violent raw process. Yeah, it's not, it's almost involuntary, but it's kind of life kicks us sometimes in places which
That's right.
feels violent, raw, and cruel. Is that what you mean?
It's exactly what
Yes,
I mean.
yes.
And yet, in hindsight, in retrospect, it was such a necessary thing to go through
Mm,
to
mm,
allow me to become who I wanted, who I am,
mm.
and becoming who I wanted to be really.
Yes, yes.
So I went and did that with Steve, and I was still depressed. Like I still had all these symptoms of depression. I still had great difficulty in getting myself to get out of bed some days,
Yes, yes.
and we had sufficient money to live on plus a little bit, and it was like, are
Mm.
you kidding me? Why do I not feel better now?
Yes, yes, yes. The impatience
uh,
and wanting to get better,
yeah,
and can you
yeah, it's
please
like,
do
come
something
on,
about this?
just
Yes.
what are we waiting for? Feel good now.
Yes, this desperation to feel better. So
Yeah,
what happened? How
I got a job, and I
mm,
had structure in my life, and I got to show up and be part of a team and belong and
mm,
begin to
mm,
create
mm,
value
mm,
again. And that was really important for me, to
mm,
have
mm,
that
mm,
structure and to have that way of providing value to people, where it didn't matter
mm.
whether I felt good or bad, whether I felt
Yes.
alive or pretty tired. I could make a difference every day, and I did.
Mm,
And
mm,
for more than 5 years, I did that job. And it was an individual contributor. Instead of being the boss, I had bosses above me, and
yes.
it was it was humbling in a way. And I don't mean humbling as in like more violence, although if there was any violence in my head, it was that I should have been able to be a manager instead of being somebody who was an individual contributor. So you can see there's
Yes.
still this judgment that I had
Yes.
about the value of a person based on their position. So that I had to
Yes.
work through.
Our ego judgments about, yes,
Yeah,
the positioning in a hierarchical system.
yeah,
Yes, and where we should be, or yes.
yeah. And I had to without having a leader title, and I did that. I learned that it didn't matter my title. I can make a difference with people and the company wherever I was.
Mm,
And
mm.
I fell in and out of love with that particular job as I went through the cycles of, this is no fun and I'm not making enough, to I'm so grateful for this job because it's helped me come out of depression, to I'm
Yes.
creating myself as a coach and I want to get out of this job so I hate it, to I love this job and giving myself fully to it so that I can
Mm,
do it. And
mm.
that job completed, uh, I'm actually still employed there, but I was informed that there's a workforce reduction, and they chose me to receive the benefits of severance,
Mm.
of separation. And I'm so thrilled because my coaching
Right,
practice has taken off and things are
right.
working together very well.
Yes,
And
yes.
the timing was perfect.
That's
And that
brilliant.
job
Yes,
helped me get through it and come out of it.
yes, yes. So just, I think severance is called redundancy in this country, I think. You call it
Yeah,
severance,
correct.
or in America?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So you're talking about what I think is also very helpful, that you're not talking about a sudden or even a linear process of recovery, or it's kind of a up and down process. Yeah. To kind of,
Almost like a roller coaster. It's like, okay, I can
yes.
tell that the general direction is upward, but I have ups and downs.
Mm,
I think
mm,
that's life. I don't know of
that's
anybody,
life.
including the people that I have enormous respect and love for. Everybody has ups and everybody has downs.
Yes.
And I can tell you that the amount of happiness that I have and joy and aliveness that I have now is extraordinary. And
Mm.
I still have my downs.
That's so important, I think, to learn to accept. I think I've learned to accept that in my life as well, that I think it's that is the nature of life, that we all have our struggles, our ups and downs, our challenges. And I think what I've learned professionally and personally, the best way to prevent depression ever again is to be emotionally alive to all of it. We can't be depressed if we feel life, if we feel the sadness, the grief, the pain. And when we can do that, we are also alive to the higher octaves, the joy, the excitement. And I think that's an interesting perspective. And you are kind of sharing that with us in your own experience and your own words.
I love what you're saying. It occurs to me like one of the major reasons I went into depression was that I was not willing to feel the
Yes,
feelings that came up. I was resistant to them because they were destructive to this idea of myself that I had. And
yes.
so not being willing to feel them, pretending that I wasn't being faced with those,
Mm, mm, mm.
that resistance caused them to gain power and strength and they overcame me basically is how it occurs to me for a long time.
Yes, 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 yes. Sometimes we have almost like an inner bucket and keep them there, the insecure feelings or the pain or the uncomfortable feelings. And
Mhm.
then something happens and the bucket overflows in a way. Yeah. So you're describing that so wonderfully.
Oh, thank you. In my coaching practice, a great deal of the time that I spend with people is actually helping them to, number one, love themselves, like have
Mm.
unconditional love for themselves. And then that allows them to share that with others and unconditional acceptance of the feelings that they have, like to allow them to feel them all the way through
Yes,
or to even observe themselves, at the age where they couldn't and support
yes,
that version of themselves in their imagination in feeling things all the way through. And
yes,
it is quite remarkable that just the act of feeling things all the way through
yes,
allows those feelings and emotions to dissipate and to
yes,
be let go of or to
yeah.
be fully processed. I'm not even sure what the proper terminology is, but I'm sure you could tell us a little bit more, a lot
Yes,
more about that,
yes,
but why it
yes.
is that way. But I just noticed that that's one of the most healing things that coaches can do with people.
That's right. And that's the gift you can now share with your clients and that I share with my clients too. We in psychology it's called emotional regulation, maybe, like regulating our feelings and sometimes to keep them stable in some ways. Because I think there are two sides of it. Some people tend to have developed an early way of coping by disconnecting from the feelings. And
Mhm.
and that also goes hand in hand with overwhelm. Sometimes we feel disconnected and sometimes we feel overwhelmed. And we need to kind of learn to manage both the overwhelming feelings as well as getting in touch with the aspects that are disconnected. And that's such an important part of our life's work, of coaching psychologists, counselors, to and ourselves. I think which is to find a way of yes accepting and being with our feeling states that are so uncomfortable often. And often we've learned, I have as well in my early years, to disconnect from these feelings. And it took me a painful process of learning, like to soothe these feelings, to accept them, to be with them, and not looking for external sources to do that, but to develop that capacity inside. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
making us more resilient in a way. And yeah.
Well, and where you came from, East Germany, I mean, my goodness, emotions and feelings were permitted, but you had to be very careful.
Exactly. You weren't allowed to be authentic. We weren't allowed to be
Yeah.
real. We had, yes. And that was in the culture, but also most family cultures in a way. And therefore in my family culture too. Mm,
Yeah.
that's
Well, I
right.
mean, it's a survival response to the situations in which the families found themselves, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So what I notice is what I love about what you said about both the spectrum of being feeling, disconnecting and overwhelm. You
Mm-hmm.
know, people who are, and this is generalization. It occurs to me
Mm,
like it's not
mm,
true. It occurs to me like people who are heart-centered tend toward overwhelm, and people
mm,
who have disconnected and are completely try to deal with
mm,
emotions with only
mm,
their mind and their logic
mm,
tend to disconnect and so they're not
mm.
bothered by it or rationalize it away or something
Yes,
like that.
rationalize it. Yes.
How did you connect and connect your heart and your mind, your emotions and your mental processes, your logic?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think I'm quite a heart-centered person, but I also was disconnected. It kind of does go hand in hand. I think, like you, life events threw me into some years of real difficulty. And for me, it was not the end of a job, but the end of a relationship that I had invested my identity in some ways. And
Mm-hmm.
then the relationship wasn't there anymore. And I felt heartbroken, sad, grief, alone. And so that was a feeling. And then I had a very strong inner critic and super ego, which made me, which was again, society values it's shameful to be single, it's shameful to not have had a child by this age, and that added to my turmoil and inner torture chamber, in a way. And I think the way I dealt with it again, it took some years, and it's an ongoing process in some ways, but I'm much freer now and much more accepting. I have this my inner critic as well in the back seat. It hasn't got a, but it's kind of to first of all become conscious of this inner critic. It's not mostly unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Then to evolve the belief systems, what that we have gathered along the way of growing up. So it's kind of taming and retiring the inner critic is one way. It's a big part of the answer. And the
Yeah.
other answer is to, instead of criticizing and constantly shaming and blaming ourselves, it's actually taking these feelings, that the vulnerability and finding a way of being with it, accepting it and loving it and soothing it. And that's the process. Yes, that's been the process, which for me, I call it my midlife crisis. It took quite a chunk of years to actually balance myself again and feel good in my own right, independent of my relationships, independent of my roles in life. So does that answer your question, Dave?
I think it's beautiful. And it also points to that the the superego, the inner critic. And I thought that that was me.
Hmm. Hmm.
I thought that the inner critic was who I
Yes,
was.
that's right. Yes.
And I love what you said, to notice that it is not, we're the one observing is how it occurs to me now. I am the one who's observing the processes that are
Hmm.
happening in my mind and in
Hmm.
my environment and in my heart. Uh, and I have the option of choosing. And from that observer, I also get to choose who I'm being with whatever situations arise.
Yes.
Also, counselors are fantastic. I use mental health professionals to this day, and I will
Hmm.
continue,
Hmm.
I think, for the rest of my life, just because it's been such a powerful way for me to get in touch with my feelings and to get out of the echo chamber of my own mind.
That's a good way
So
of yes, it's a good way of finishing our conversation, Dave. The echo chamber of our own minds. I think that's such an important part of maintaining depression. To have this continuous critic sitting on our shoulders and blaming and shaming ourselves. That's a big part of it. And again, that's an ongoing journey, changing our inner world, our beliefs, our thoughts, our thinking patterns. And yeah. So thank you so much, Dave, for your time and your courage to share these vulnerable parts of your life and also to share with us the wisdom that you've gathered along the way.
thank you, Kirsten. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.